At the end of this lesson, I received feedback that resulted in some small but important corrections. These corrections have been integrated into the slides and the words that you see on screen.
So, my name is Jeff Epstein. This is an introduction to modern monetary theory. I am with Real Progressives. You may know me on Twitter as Citizens Media TV. First, I would like to thank especially Rowan Gray and the Modern Money Network for allowing me to give this talk, and my own Modern Money MMT teachers, Jeff Ginter and Ellis Winningham. I want to thank Real Progressives and Steve Grumbine for giving me the platform and to access to a lot of really amazing people. And also to just the many, many supporters who have given me so much feedback in improving this lesson. I've given this pretty much every single week since the end of June, and although it's made an impact from the beginning, it has dramatically improved and sharpened since then. So first, I am not an expert. I am not an economist. So like many of you, I am a student. I never heard of modern monetary theory before February. Therefore, it is not my job to teach. That job is left to the experts and the economists. However, my one and only job is to help you understand all of the miseducation and the misconceptions that we have been taught for our entire lives. After your eyes are opened to MMT, it is time to send you off to the experts, and my job is done. So for those who want to know what MMT is but don't have time to listen to a lesson, I give them this elevator pitch. So modern monetary theory, or MMT, is the study of how our economy actually functions. MMT shows why the powerful always get what they want, and why the people only get crumbs, nothing at all, or even less than that. MMT shows exactly how we can actually get the programs that we need to survive. And it also shows that our government can easily give us these things tomorrow if they wanted to, and they could have given us these things decades ago if they wanted to. The powerful have always known MMT. For war and for tax breaks, they just do it. No pay-fors in any of those bills. But when it comes to healthcare, education, forgiving student debt, a job guarantee, suddenly they forget about MMT. Suddenly it's, how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? And the way that I like to sort of summarize this all up in a cheeky kind of way is MMT for the rich, rugged neoliberalism for the poor. Okay, so we're going to do this in 5 chapters. First, where does money come from? So you and I, we get our paycheck from our company. Most of us get a paycheck from our company. Some of us sell merchandise and we get money from the people who purchase that stuff from us. Patrons, monthly patrons, we might get monthly contributions or one-time only contributions. So we get it from our employers. We get the dollar from our employers. Where do our employers get it from? They get it from their customers. Those customers get it from their paychecks, and on and on and on and on. But the ultimate answer, what happened? But the ultimate answer is the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve creates the United States dollar. But they don't just create it because they want to create it. They are instructed to do so by the Treasury. The Treasury is instructed to do so by the budgetary process, which represents the numbers that are in laws that are signed by the president. Those laws were originally bills that were written by the Congress. So Congress is the ultimate answer of who creates the United States dollar. Through a series of steps, the Federal Reserve actually does it, but the Federal Reserve is at the command of Congress. So just to give a tiny bit of the details of how this works, the Federal Reserve creates the money, distributes that money to the state reserves distribute that money to the banks, the local banks. They put them in the bank accounts of companies who implement these laws, and then we get it for our paychecks. A critical distinction is that the Congress has no bank that they go to, that they ask for money. We go to a bank and we ask for money, and if they feel like we can handle it, they give us a loan. The Federal Reserve is the bank of the country, but they only work at the command of Congress. This is a critical distinction. There is no bank above the Congress. So Congress writes a number into a bill, and then that bill is signed into law by the president, and then through the budgetary process, the money is created. So for this example, this is a bill on Elizabeth Warren's congressional website, $2.7 billion for fiscal year 2019, same for 2020, same for the next and the next and the next. I believe that these are non-discretionary, so once this law is passed, that this money is created without voting or debate. So writing a number into a bill, I'll take questions at the end, forgive me. Writing a number into a bill is very similar to a child drawing a $1 trillion bill or a $100 bill on a piece of construction paper. It is very similar to choosing to tick up the score on a scoreboard. They can create the money because they want to create the money. The money exists because they want it to exist. So according to the Constitution of the United States, Article 1, Section 8, the Congress is the monopoly currency issuer. This means that they are the only ones in the world that are allowed to create the United States dollar. So the Congress, and I'm going to say Congress and federal government sort of interchangeably, the Congress can create the dollar as much as it wants, whenever it wants, for whatever it wants, and it is the only one in the world that is allowed to do it. The Constitution, Article 1, Section 8. This is what declares that the Congress is the monopoly currency issuer, and also through a series of some Supreme Court cases further clarifies that they can create coins, bills, and electronic money. We are a fiat currency. Fiat means by decision or by decree. We can create the money because we decide to create the money. A fiat currency has a monopoly currency issuer, and the currency is not backed by anything physical, such as gold, and the currency is not pegged to any other economies. In August of 1971, the Nixon administration took the United States and a lot of other countries off of the gold standard. These other currencies are the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, England, and others. The European Union is a more recent fiat currency. Monopoly currency issuer. They create the money, the only one that's allowed to create the money. Everybody else and everything else is a currency user. So me and you and our families and our households and our companies, municipalities, which means states and cities, which means towns and cities, our states, and even other countries such as China and Russia. As far as the US dollar is concerned, we are all currency users. So currency users must get income in the United States dollar from somewhere, something, or someone else. We must get income before we can spend. Because we are not allowed to create the currency, and if we tried to do so, we would go to federal prison for counterfeiting. Congress, however, is the currency issuer. They are the one and only source of the United States dollar. They don't need income before they can spend. To the Congress only, the terms, to the currency issuer only, the terms spend money and create money are exactly the same. So when you say the Congress created $100. That is exactly the same thing as saying the Congress spent $100 into the economy. So the Congress doesn't require income, which means that they don't need to borrow from anyone or anything. We don't need to borrow from China because we create the money as much as we want, whenever we want, for whatever we want. And China doesn't create the dollar anyway. They have to get it from us. And again, there is no bank above the Congress. The federal government also does not need to get money from taxpayers because we don't create the currency. Taxpayers don't create the currency. We have to get it from the government. But even just hypothetically, even if we could get it from taxpayers or from China, there is no difference between saying Congress created $100 and spent it into the economy, or Congress created $50 and spent it into the economy, and then somehow collected income of $50 and then spent that also into the economy. There is no difference. There's no benefit in collecting anything. They can just create it. Federal taxes do not fund federal spending. Federal spending funds federal taxes. So what do I mean by that? When the United States government was first formed, when the Constitution was just signed, but before the first dollar was created, it is not possible for the federal government to come to the people and say, you owe us $100 in taxes and it must be paid in the United States dollar, because then they turn to the government and they say, what's a United States dollar? You have never given me one, I have never seen one, so how can I possibly pay your taxes? The people must be given the dollar before they can pay taxes. So another way of saying this is, the people do not fund the government funds the people. Chapter 2. The Pony for All Act of 2018. So Hillary Clinton, in her book, said to Bernie Sanders, it's so nice that you want to give everybody a pony, Bernie. Everybody would love a pony, but how are you going to pay for it? So that inspired Stephanie Kelton's article in 2017, and that article inspired this chapter. Good news, the Congress and the President have gotten together and they have decided that they will be giving every single American citizen, every man, woman, and child in the United States a free pony if they want one. And you and I are members of Congress, and it is our job to write this bill. So here is the current situation. We have 320 million Americans around, and we have approximately 500,000 ponies. Demand far outstrips supply. So we must make these things roughly equal. Demand must roughly equal supply, or we're going to have a very big problem. There's only one of two solutions. One is to increase supply, and one is to decrease demand, or some combination of the two. So we could decrease demand, but that goes against the whole point of this law, a Pony for All Act of 2018. So that doesn't really make sense. We could deport or kill hundreds of millions of Americans as well to decrease demand. We're not going to do that. So we are going to increase supply. We could import ponies from other countries, probably won't make much of a difference. We could create robotic ponies, probably won't make much of a difference. So the most obvious solution is to reproduce. So our current population of 500,000 ponies must be increased to 320 million. How do we do that? Well, the obvious solution is that mommy and daddy ponies are going to have to do their things over and over and over again. So we now have to understand, if we're going to figure out how long this is going to take, we have to figure out the gestation period for a horse, roughly 10 to 11 months. After giving birth, how quickly can the mommy do it again? Say roughly 2 months. So every cycle is about a year. So given these biological constraints, how long will it take to reproduce 500,000 to 320 million? Very roughly, we'll say 20 years. That's how long it's going to take. So now the population of ponies is exploding. And that has enormous consequences because we can feed and shelter and care for 500,000 ponies, no problem. We've been doing it forever. But now the population is exploding, so now we're going to need many more supplies. More food, more water, more farms, fencing, shelter, horseshoes, caring for the land, which means we're going to need to educate millions of more blacksmiths and veterinarians and caretakers and breeders, which means that now we're going to have to distribute these things across the country, so trucking and shipping. So a new industry is being created with lots of new jobs, which is a wonderful benefit, but that is not the important point. Now it's 20 years later, and the people are going to pick up their ponies. We have the best staff, best people. It's not going to be chaotic. It's going to be perfectly organized. That's not a problem. But the people don't know how to take care of ponies, so we have to train them. Their homes are not prepared to take care of ponies, so we have to prepare them. So all of the resources, no, all of the supplies and services that we just spoke about now have to be reproduced at a micro level all across the country. And finally, what do we do when they die? So this is the full life cycle. This is what it takes to create this bill. This is what it takes to give every single American a free pony. It genuinely could happen, as silly as it is. It genuinely could be done. This is our bill. However, let's say someone comes in and says 20 years is not acceptable, it's got to be done in 5 years, okay? So we write a law that says it must be done in 5 years. We threaten the people and we say if you don't do it in 5 years, you're going to have severe consequences. And we're also going to say, I know it's going to be hard, so we're going to throw $10 trillion at it. So what's going to happen? No amount of money or laws or threats can change biological processes. Can't change the best gestation period of a horse doesn't change because you give them some money. No amount of money can change how fast all of these things are distributed around the country. No amount of money can change how fast we can educate millions of people to be veterinarians and blacksmiths and so on. And no amount of money can change how fast to prepare the people, training in their homes. This is the point. Nothing can make this happen quicker than 20 years. It is out of human control. To the federal government, the only thing that matters is real resources. To the federal government, money doesn't matter. When I say real resources, I mean raw materials, labor, technology, and time, because we can have those things, but we need time to make it happen, in this case, 20 years. So there's often an argument made against MMT, which we've heard a couple of times already today, that MMT says that we can spend, as much as we want without consequence, which I inaccurately said before. We can spend as much as we want without consequence. We can have everything we want, which of course is going to cause hyperinflation. Often this argument is done in bad faith. But if the Congress does not spend more money into the economy than our real resources can handle, our productive capacity, our capacity to produce more than that can handle, then there is no inflationary risk. In fact, in many cases, it is simply impossible to spend more money into the economy than our real resources can handle. And the problem is not worrying about inflation. That's not our real problem. Our problem is that we leave so many resources idle that could be benefiting the people. So much labor that is simply unemployed or unhappy, ready to do good work for the people, and we let them sit idle. That's the problem. And finally, we can tax back money to give the government extra space to spend more money. To the federal government, money doesn't matter. Only real resources matter. And if we can give everyone in the country a free pony, then why in the world can't we give Americans free health care and college? And why can't we forgive student debt when, directly speaking, there are almost zero real resources involved in doing so? Next chapter. Why do we collect federal taxes? So when I give this lesson one-on-one to people, before I begin, I ask them, why are federal taxes collected and what are they used for? And the answer that they almost always give me is that they pay for things. They give us Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. They pay for the military. They pay too much for the military. They pay for federal employees' salaries, FBI and Social Security employees and the politicians and the president. They help us fix our bridges and give us infrastructure and fix our roads. But we now know that this is not true. So why do we collect federal taxes? There are three major reasons that I'm going to talk about today. First, the purpose, and then two important uses. Excuse me, I'll get a drink. The purpose of collecting federal taxes is to drive the currency and drive the economy. And to almost all the people that I speak to, they have no clue what that means. When I first heard it, I had no clue what that means. And how could we? Because we've never been taught this. But before we go into what that means, I want to talk about the purpose of a government. The purpose of a government is to compel the people to use the real resources at its disposal for the benefit of society. And money, the US dollar, is the incentive that the government gives to the people for doing so. Money is a less violent form of coercion than a gun to the head or threats. So some of that money is taxed back, but the rest of it, the people get to do whatever they want with. There are no strings attached. It is an interest-free grant. So when Britain went into the countries that they tried to colonialize, how did they get those people to use the British pound? When the United States began, how did they get the people in the 13 colonies to use the dollar? And how they did it, because they were perfectly happy using the British pound at the time. And what they said to the people was, you will pay taxes, and you will pay them only in our currency. Because if you don't, you will face severe consequences. Penalties, confiscation, jail. Severe penalties for not paying federal taxes. That is what forces the people to care about the money. That is what forces the people to find a job so they can get more of that money because they have to pay federal taxes in that money. The federal government, however, only cares about its real resources and productive capacity. So I have heard a number of times the US dollar has value, people say, because people have faith in the US government. But what that is more accurately stated as is that the US dollar has value because people have faith that the US government will do something really severe if you don't pay your federal taxes with the US dollar. Critical use one. So that is driving the currency and driving the economy. Now we're going to go into critical use one, controlling demand. So at the end of the Depression through World War II, the United States only went off of the gold standard. In 1971, a whole bunch of countries did. During World War II, car manufacturers stopped making new cars, and they used all of their real resources, steel, rubber, plastic, paint, so on. Instead of making new cars, they made tanks and boats and planes and artillery. No new cars were produced during the war. However, roughly speaking, demand for new cars was about the same. Before we move on, we need to define inflation because it is often misused. The term is often misused. Inflation is not when the price of bread goes up. Inflation is not when the price of gas goes up. Inflation is not when the price of everything in an entire industry goes up. Inflation is when the price of everything available for sale in the US dollar goes up and continues to go up. It is a macroeconomic phenomenon. Inflation is a big deal. So we had a lot of new people that wanted new cars, and we had no new cars to offer them. We must make these roughly equal or we're going to have a big problem. The only two solutions are to either increase supply or decrease demand, or some combination of the two. In this situation, however, increasing supply is simply not an option. We have decided that fighting the war is the only thing that matters. So therefore, we must decrease demand. So how do we do that? We can compel the people, we can force them, or we can entice them to stop buying new cars. What are some examples of compelling them using a stick instead of a carrot? We could raise taxes, we could make new laws or regulations, and we can threaten them. That's not what happened. We used a carrot. We tried to entice them to stop buying new cars. What is more appealing than a new car? So people use their money for that instead. And during the war, the answer is patriotism. The government offered the people war bonds. They were marketed as support the troops, support the war effort, but as we now know, they didn't pay for anything. They didn't actually pay for things, even though it was very strongly implied that they do. So here's an example war bond or bond. 10 years, 3.25% annual interest. So if you purchased one of these war bonds in 1945 for $1,000, in 1955 it would mature and you would get back $1,377. War bonds removed the people's money from the economy and reduced demand for new cars, avoiding this big problem. So bonds are very similar to taxes. Both remove money from the economy. Bonds are voluntary, taxes are compulsory. Bonds have a specific length of time that the money leaves the economy. Taxes do not. They leave the money for taxes leaves the economy for infinite length. They never come back. And bonds offer a bonus of interest. But there is one crucial difference between bonds and taxes. Both bonds and taxes remove money from the economy. But when you pay $1,000 in your taxes, you write $1,000, your name on a tax return, you mail it into the federal government. The federal government puts that tax return into a folder in a filing cabinet or on a folder on a computer, and they go through your bank, into your bank account and lower your bank balance by $1,000. Nothing happens on their side. They don't raise anything by $1,000. That money does not move from your bank account to the government's bank account. However, they have your tax return and they've notated on your tax return how much you've paid. They know how much you've paid and when you've paid it, but they don't have that money. It simply disappears from you. So when Congress writes a number into a bill and it's signed into law by the president and through the budgetary process, money is born. On the other side, the opposite side of that is when it is taxed back, it dies. And again, I want to emphasize we are only talking about federal level, not state, not local. So taxes are the opposite of money creation. And if you think about it, it has to have an opposite. Otherwise, we're going to accumulate infinite money and lose control very quickly. So taxing is like a child erasing that bill off of a piece of construction paper. It is like ticking down the score on a scoreboard to 0. The money disappears because we want it to disappear. Critical use number 2 for federal taxes. And it's called imposing moral decisions. Some of the following examples are more applicable to state and local. However, the concepts are exactly the same. So we could increase taxes to discourage behavior by making it more expensive. We could decrease taxes to encourage behavior by making it less expensive. Examples of increasing taxes to discourage behavior. We could discourage use of vices, alcohol, gambling, smoking, drugs. We could discourage activities that cause pollution and climate change by raising taxes on those activities. We could decide how much do we want to raise taxes? How much do we want to discourage it? Do we want to stop it, or do we want to just slow it down and raise it a little bit? We could also decrease taxes to encourage behavior. We could decrease taxes on gym memberships. We could decrease taxes on activities that prevent pollution and climate change, such as solar panels and electric cars. And there's one more example of discouraging behavior going back with raised taxes. And that is to increase taxes on the super wealthy to discourage immoral levels of income inequality. For example, we as a society could decide on 3 thresholds, and we as a society could decide on the specific numbers for those thresholds. And let's say that this is what we came up with. The top threshold is $1 billion. Everything above that, if you have $1 billion or more. And we say that the consequence of this is that if you have that much money, you can buy politicians and you can create the laws in your favor, and that is simply unacceptable. And we decide that that is called obscene wealth. And we're going to tax almost all of it. However, we are only going to tax the portion above $1 billion, not below it. We are only talking about the obscene portion. Threshold number 2, below that, 500 million to a billion. And this threshold is not quite as obscene. However, it is really difficult to become even more wealthy unless you harm other people in the process by extracting off of their well-being. So we decide that this is simply too rich. It's not obscene, but it is too rich, and we're going to tax a lot of it. And finally, $0 to $500 million. If you have that much money, enjoy it. That's the American dream. It's reasonable. So we're going to tax a modest amount of it, but you can basically keep it and enjoy it. An important aside. MMT is knowledge. MMT does not say whether or not we should tax the rich. It also does not say how much we should tax the rich by. I, as a progressive, however, take the knowledge of MMT and say, yes, we must tax the rich. Our corrupt politicians take the knowledge of MMT and choose to give tax breaks to the millionaires. They use the knowledge of MMT to help the rich. They don't want to help the people, or they don't help the people. We can choose to do with that knowledge or not do with that knowledge whatever we feel is right. You don't blame medicine or choose not to learn medicine because Nazis took that knowledge and chose to conduct horrible experiments. What you should do is learn MMT and cure people. Medicine. You should learn medicine and cure people. You don't blame MMT or choose not to learn MMT because our corrupt politicians choose to take that knowledge and help rich people instead of the people. You should learn MMT and help the people. And besides, you can't fight the cheaters if you don't know the rules. So I, as a progressive, say, yes, we must tax the rich. We must tax the rich to reduce their power, which would therefore increase our power. We must tax the wealthy because it is moral and just and equitable and right. We cannot and should not tax the rich because we need their money. Yet that is all we ever hear. Not only shouldn't we tax the rich to get their money, it is impossible to tax the rich to get their money. Yet this is all we ever hear. I, as a progressive, also say that we should reduce the military, not MMT. I do. Because we are the bullies of the world. The military is supposed to protect the people. We must reduce the military because it is moral and just and right. We should not and cannot reduce the military in order to get that money so we can have health care or education. All federal programs are funded by created money. And these are numbers that were written into bills that are already on the books. Money is created for federal programs whenever it is needed every single time. Whenever a Social Security benefit is paid out, the currency is created. Whenever Medicare benefits and all other benefits, federal benefits are paid out, currency is created. Whenever federal employees, their salaries are paid, currency is created. Same with military funding. Federal employees examples for FBI, military, judges, congressmen. Next chapter. The big lie. The big lie is all we ever hear. They say that money, for the federal government, money is exactly the same as money to me and you, as currency users, currency issuer. They say that the economy for currency issuers for the federal government is exactly the same as the economy for me and you. A budget for the federal government is exactly the same as a budget for me and you. This is the big lie. To say that these things are different between me and you compared to the federal government is an understatement. There is simply no comparison. Yet all we ever hear is that these things are exactly the same. And every other lie is based on this big lie. The national debt and borrowing. So you and I go to a bank and we ask for a loan. We say, can I please have $100? They analyze our history and they decide, sure, you can have $100. We are instantly in debt to the bank for $100 plus interest, 100% of that money. The bank will do whatever it takes to get that money back. There is no equivalent situation for the federal government. A reminder of the federal government's purpose. A government's purpose is to compel the people to use its real resources for the benefit of society. And money is the incentive that people get to do so. So when the Congress creates the currency, they are the source of the currency. What does it even mean to say that a currency issuer is in debt? What does it even mean to say that the currency issuer has borrowed money, needs to borrow money? Who does a currency issuer borrow their debt? Who does a currency issuer owe their debt to? Who do they borrow it from? No one else can create the United States dollar. There is no bank above the Congress. And to those who say we must pay back the debt, or our country is going to go bankrupt, our grandchildren are going to go bankrupt, to them, I want them to explain, I think they should be pushed to explain exactly how, logistically, step by step, how do you pay back that debt? How do you pay back the national debt? And to who? Our politicians, media, academia, and so-called experts constantly panic about this national debt that we must pay back. They talk about how it will bankrupt our nation and our future generations, and yet we never hear any protests or demands from this mythical bank that we supposedly owe this money to. So here's the technical definition of the national debt. The national debt is the total of all money that the Congress has spent into the economy since our country began that has not yet been taxed back. That's the technical definition. But here's the same thing in an easy-to-understand version. The national debt is the total amount of money of every American citizen's, every currency user's, investments, bank accounts, and wallets. The national debt is the American people's value. And if you truly wanted to pay down the national debt, if you truly wanted to get it down to zero, first of all, we could write a $21 trillion bill on a piece of construction paper. I don't know who we would give it to, but we could do that. But if we really wanted to get it down to zero, then by definition, that means we have to empty out every single American citizen's investments, bank accounts, and wallets. The big lie, a balanced budget, surplus, and deficit for me and you is exactly the same as these things for the federal government. So for me and you, balanced budget, surplus, and deficit. At the beginning of the week, we budget $100 for food, gas, children, everything. With a balanced budget, at the end of the week, we ended up spending $100, exactly what we budgeted. And we were fiscally responsible, and probably a little lucky. With a surplus, we budgeted $100 at the beginning of the week. At the end of the week, we spent $85. We have $15 left over. We can give ourselves a treat. We could treat our family. We were even more fiscally responsible, and probably a little more lucky. A deficit. You and I, we budget $100 at the beginning of the week. At the end of the week, unfortunately, we had to spend $120. We went over budget. We were fiscally irresponsible and probably had some bad luck. A deficit for me and you forces us to dip into our savings, use credit, take out a loan, call in favors, depend on charity, beg and steal. And now let's go into opposite world. A balanced budget, a surplus, and deficit for the federal government. The federal government spends $100 into the economy, so people do what benefits society. And with a balanced budget in April, they tax back $100, all of it. What do people have left in their pockets after they pay their taxes? They have nothing. They have no money to invest or spend or save or survive. Yet this is what we are told is called fiscally responsible. A surplus. The government spends $100 into the economy, so the people do what benefits society. And in April, they tax back $120. What do the people have in their pockets? They have less than zero. They can't even pay back their taxes with the money that the government has given them, let alone survive. But this is what is called even more fiscally responsible. And finally, the deficit. Government spends $100 into the economy, or $1 billion, whatever it is. Spends $100 into the economy, so people do what benefits society. In April, they tax back $30. What do the people have in their pockets? They have $70 after paying their taxes. Now they can invest and save and spend and survive. And this is called fiscally irresponsible. The federal deficit is the people's income. It is the only thing that gives the people value. Yet this is the only thing that we are told is fiscally irresponsible. We are going to blow a hole in the deficit. And what they're saying is, it is irresponsible to give the American people value. The federal deficit is not just important, it is critical to the functioning of society. Without a deficit, people have no incentive to do what benefits society. The government might as well put a gun to their heads. And why would they spend $100 into the economy, given the purpose of a government, if they're just going to take it all back? Without a federal deficit, Americans are forced to dip into their savings, use credit, take out loans, depend on charity, beg and steal just to survive. And this puts pressure on states and cities who depend on that tax revenue from their citizens because they do need income. They are a currency user just like us. I would call the federal deficit our national income. I would call the national debt our national value or savings. Last chapter. Racism. Racism is a tool to tear the people apart. Xenophobia is a tool to tear the people apart. Don't be angry at the boss that chose to hire an immigrant over an American, screwing both of them. Be angry at the powerless immigrant. Classism is a tool to tear the people apart. Homophobia and sexism, these are all tools to tear the people apart. Economic ignorance is a tool to tear the people apart. For our entire lives, we have been taught the perfect storm of misinformation to get everybody fighting with everybody. There is nothing wrong with disagreeing on policy. That is a good thing. But there is a big problem when we disagree on the reality of how our economy actually functions. Examples of how we fight. Progressives and Democrats say, please raise my taxes because I want my taxes to go to health care. Don't raise my taxes for war, but I want to give everybody health care. Please raise my taxes. I'm a nice person. It's not just for me. And that triggers a huge population of people that are genuinely terrified of raised taxes. They are convinced that it will bankrupt themselves, their families, their businesses, and the whole country. So they stand against our big programs because they are convinced that it will raise our taxes, and most progressives and Democrats agree that it will raise our taxes. And it won't. So this makes no sense, yet we fight over it. Take money from the rich. Bernie Sanders still says, although he is doing better, Bernie Sanders still says we must tax the rich so they pay their fair share in taxes, so we can have infrastructure. Which triggers a huge population of people that say, how dare you penalize success? Who do you think creates the jobs anyway? Take money from the military. We must reduce the military. Just imagine what we could use that money for. And that triggers another population of people to say, how dare you jeopardize our national security, and how dare you jeopardize our troops? And none of this makes economic sense, because we don't need to take money from the powerful. We don't need to raise taxes necessarily for these big programs. Most progressives, the Young Turks, for example, Bernie Sanders, what they do so well is they clearly articulate what is wrong. We don't have health care, and this is why that's so wrong. We don't have free education, and this is why that is so wrong. And on the other side, they clearly articulate how the world could be better if we had health care, and this is why, if we had education, and this is why. They help us envision the world that could and should be. But the one thing that most progressives and most Americans, I'm mixing things up. The one thing that most progressives get wrong is when we actually try to get these programs, the one critical step at the very end to actually make these things happen. Why don't we actually have any of these programs that we need to survive? These things that we have been talking about and preaching about for decades. The answer is that we spend most of our time arguing and debating over and analyzing these economically inaccurate things as if they are more important than the genuine benefits that these programs will provide to us, like survival. We incorrectly believe that these economically inaccurate things are a prerequisite to getting what we need. So our progressive leaders and the media, along with most progressives and most Americans, sabotage our actually getting these critical programs that we need to survive. So when we march onto Congress and demand single-payer health care, we demand it tomorrow. Our Congress member turns to us and says, "Oh, I wish I could give it to you. There is nothing more in the world that I want to do than give it to you. I know how much you want it and need it, how much it will alleviate your suffering, but I can't. I can't give it to you because of the debt and the deficit and fiscally responsible. How are you going to pay for it?" And almost all of us fall for this pay-for trap, and it is a trap and a trick. Our federal politicians ask us, how are you going to pay for it? And most of us go back to the drawing table and try and figure it out. We try, and we spend most of our time trying to figure it out, coming up with better numbers. And every time we do this, it just makes the people fight more. The truth is, they just don't want to give it to us because they're paid to not give it to us. They hide behind these economically inaccurate things to pretend that it's somehow out of their control. Here is the technical answer to how are you going to pay for it. The answer is we are a fiat currency. If we have the real resources to do it, then you could create the money to do it if you wanted. That's the technical answer. But this is the answer that I believe should be given to the how are you going to pay for it question. We will pay for it by getting you out of office and replacing you with someone who will never ask that question again. They will do whatever it takes to just make it happen. And until that day, 100% of our energy will be spent making your life a living hell until you either get out of office or you give it to us. Why? So why don't we have single-payer health care? Because it has nothing to do with health care. First, they want to profit off of us. They want to profit off of our sickness and our suffering and our death. But that's not the biggest thing. What's bigger than that is that it chains us to our jobs. And therefore, we can't stand up to our bosses because if we dared try, we risk health care for our whole family. But that's not the biggest thing. In my opinion, the biggest reason that we don't have single-payer health care is that it chains us to our jobs and makes it unaffordable to leave our job and run for office. Because if we did that, then we could get our corrupt politicians out of office and create a government that actually cares about the people, more than it cares about money and power and donations. That's why we don't have health care and free college and forgiven student debt and a federal job guarantee. Power. Power is relative. The only way that the powerful can stay powerful is to actively keep the powerless powerless. We don't need to fight the powerful. We just need to stop fighting ourselves. We don't need to take money from the powerful. We don't need to take power from the powerful. We just need to empower ourselves. There is nothing wrong with disagreeing on policy. That's a good thing. There is a big problem, however, in disagreeing on the reality of how our economy actually functions. Thank you. So I'm going to leave this up. If you have some questions, I don't know how much time. You'll stop me when it's too long. But I'm not talking about this, but I put this at the beginning and at the end, and I hope that you can see how critically this relates to the situation.